What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Mind the Marsal podcast. This is episode number 155, and I am your host, Armando Marsal. You can catch all of my work over at fantasyguru.com and follow me on the X Machine at Armando underscore Marsal, as well as on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Mind the Marsal. Remember, if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, rate, review the show wherever it is you're listening to it. Every bit of your support does help the podcast continue to grow. We jump into today's episode, I just want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support truly means a lot to me. I appreciate you guys spending a little portion of your day here with me, listening to me talk sports. Remember, you can catch this show and all of the episodes over at my YouTube channel at Mind of Marsal there. So make sure you're following, subscribing, and checking out all of the shows there with the video content. No guests this week. I'm continuing the rolling solo. We are going to continue discussing the positional breakdowns. Last week I did the running back position. That was episode number 153. If you haven't already heard that, go check that out. I break down the running back position, talk about my top guys I'm targeting, the mid round guys I'm targeting, as well as some late round flyers. We're going to take the same approach here today. But we're going to be talking all things wide receivers. So we're going to I'll walk you through how I'm targeting and attacking the position this season. Starting with some of my favorite, high end options, and then I'll, go down basically down my ranking order, and tiers and things like that as far as who I'm targeting at ADP, some late round flyers, players I'm avoiding at ADP. Very similar structure than the one we had last week for the running back position. So I'll be doing that here today. If you haven't been checking it out, make sure you're checking out our training camp report series. We had 2 episodes last week. I'll be doing another episode here tomorrow, Friday, August 21st. So keep an eye out for that, the training camp report. We also have our training camp event over at fantasyguru.com, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't checked that out and you haven't been, if you've never attended, I strongly recommend it. Basically, it's an entire day full of presentations from all of our staff members. Jeff Mance is there, myself, Tyler Beek, Russell Clay, Scott Bonder, Mike Sillo, Chris Rose, Rob Brink. We have Rich Melletto, Justin Fensterman, Ray Flowers. Everyone has their hands involved in this one. And it's an entire day event. And if you miss anything, so it starts at 9 in the morning. And it ends, I believe it's 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Eastern that it ends. So about a 12-hour event there. And then at the end of it all, guess what? We got a poker game going on with this, everyone who attends the event, as well as the staff members who are participating in the event. So it is a fun day, full day of both football and just hanging out after. It's an online poker event, so you don't necessarily have to be in a physical location. It is online. It's free. All you need is a ticket to the entry, a ticket to our training camp event there at fantasyguru.com to enter into this fun poker tournament that we do there. So make sure you're checking all of that out, guys. It's all over at fantasyguru.com. We still got great pricing there. Obviously a ton of preseason content. We got the Fantasy Guru, NFL draft guide there. That's still being updated on a consistent basis. We got tons of, DFS preseason content. We got college football content as well. We got all of that stuff, guys. So make sure you're checking that out there. So as I said, we're going to be talking wide receivers here. We're going to take a deep dive into the receiver position, and there's plenty to discuss here today. So we'll be going, like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the high-end guys first here, and then we'll dive into, some mid-range values that I'm looking at, and then the late-round flyers. And then I'll also point out some best ball guys that I prefer best ball that I'm really maybe not be targeting a redraft, but I am going to be targeting in some best balls. Right? So should be a fun one here, filled with lots of information. So hopefully you enjoyed this ride now, huh? So we're jumping in, and look, my number one wide receiver, it's very simple. It's been this way now for several years. And that's Jamar Chase. He's my wide receiver one. There should be no surprises. He was my wide receiver one last year. He's been my, like I mentioned, wide receiver one multiple years here. And, look, he's someone that provides you consistency, right? Durability for the most part. He's been, pretty much if you look at his numbers here, he's played at least 16 regular season games in all but one season. Year two was the only time he missed, multiple games where he played just 12 games, but just as consistent as they come here. The target share has been through the roof since he entered the NFL, 23%. Year one, 30%, 26%, 28%, 32% target share here. Like obviously a high end As far as volume is concerned, high-end player, over 120, 25, I'm sorry, minimum 127 targets each and every season. You're talking about a player who's top 1,200 receiving yards in 4 of the 5 seasons since entering the NFL. You're talking about someone that it's topped 1,000 receiving yards every season since entering the NFL. At least 7 receiving touchdowns in every season since entering the NFL. You look at the PPR production. He's been wide receiver 5, 3, 12, 1, and 3 in PPR points per game. And overall, he's been a top 11 receiver each and every season since entering the NFL, including top 4 finishes in back-to-back seasons in 2024, wide receiver 1, 2025, wide receiver 4. He also had a top 5 finish as a rookie. I mean, someone who's been just phenomenal since entering the NFL. In my opinion, he's the best receiver in football, right? When you're looking at, the physical aspect of it, the route running, like what he brings to the table, he's the best receiver in football. You can make a case for several guys, right? So it's not that you can't make that argument for anyone else, but in my opinion, he's the best receiver in football, and he's obviously delivering from a fantasy aspect as well. So this is an offense that I expect it's going to throw a ton again this season. This defense in Cincinnati is not great. Um, Therefore, I don't expect them to be, shutting people down and being able to establish the run. This is going to be an offense that passes the ball a ton. They were a pass-heavy offense last season. They've been a pass-heavy offense, for several years now, and I don't anticipate that changing this year. So for me, Jamar Chase, he's not only my wide receiver 1, he's my number 1 overall pick. And I said this in the previous podcast when I was talking about running backs. Like, I'm not going to argue with anyone who wants to take Jahmyr Gibbs at number 1. I'm not going to argue with anyone who wants to take Bijan Robinson at number 1. I'm not going to argue with anyone who wants to take either of those 2 running backs ahead of Jamar Chase and with the first 2 picks. It's not you're not going to get a pushback from me. But if I'm on the clock, I got the number 1 pick. I'm going to take Jamar Chase. He's a model of consistency. Like, he gives you that weekly floor. His ceiling is through the roof. He, obviously, when you look at the production, let's just look at the PPR points per game since entering the NFL: 18, 20.5, 16.4, 23.7, 19.7. You're talking about a guy who has the potential to deliver 18 to 20 fantasy points on a weekly basis pretty consistently, right? And that's what I like it with my top picks, right? Like, I'm looking for a secure pick. He's been durable. He's been efficient. He's been productive. He's showcased the ability to be the number 1 at his position. And that's exactly what he brings to the table. So for me, Jamar Chase, pretty easy click when I'm looking at the, top receiver, and even the number 1 overall pick in a PPR setting league here. So for me, he's my top guy. His ADP, obviously he's going in top 5 picks in pretty much every draft. So if you want Jamar Chase, you're probably going to have to draw a top 5 pick outside of, super flex leagues or 2 quarterback leagues where the ADP really, differs. But in a 1 quarterback PPR setting, you're going to need a top 5 pick in most leagues to give yourself a chance at Jamar Chase. My wide receiver 2 on my board is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know he's not on, the number 2 receiver on a lot of boards. We usually have Nakua. We usually have JSN mixed in that top 3. But for me, man, you look at these numbers, right? And I have everything here. For those watching, you see me looking to the left here. I got everything on all my notes here on the left. And consistent, check. Durable, check. Solidified role, check. You're talking about a man who's had a 21, 28, 30, 27, and 32% target share. Over a 26% target share in 4 consecutive seasons. That's not changing. That is not changing. He's played at least 16 games in every season since entering the NFL. Let's look at the finishes here. As a rookie, he finishes 22nd in PPR scoring. Year 2, 2022, wide receiver 7. Then 2023, wide receiver 3. 2024, wide receiver 2. 2025, wide receiver 3. You look at PPR points per game, he's been wide receiver 4 in 3 consecutive seasons. You're talking about top 5 production. He gives you a weekly floor, an insane ceiling. We've seen that ceiling before, and the solidified role. And I don't see that going anywhere. For me, well, again, we're talking about minimizing risk early on in drafts, right? We've talked about this. I've said this in previous podcasts. Like, the wide receiver position, it can be volatile for some of these guys. There are volatility. And there's, we'll talk about as I go through this, I'll discuss, kind of what I'm looking for at this point in drafts. Is it volatility? Is it the high ceiling? But I'm not too concerned about the weekly floor. Like, but right now, that's not my goal. Right now, we're talking about early rounds. We're talking about, reduce that risk. And that's what we're doing here. For me, I'm locking in Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I have him as again, I have it as a top five pick on my board, and normally that when I'm drawing, people ask me this year, what pick do you like, and I'm okay with a top six pick, right? Because there are six guys I feel very comfortable with. Um, taking early on in drafts, and he happens to be one of those, right? So I'm totally fine with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm comfortable with him as early as your fourth pick. Like so, there we go. I'm comfortable with Amon-Ra St. Brown as early as the fourth overall pick in a PPR setting. He's my second wide receiver. He's generally coming off the board in picks 5 through 9. So I think you're pretty safe. When you get a top five pick, top six pick even with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, just efficient, productive, solidified role. Going to continue that. Been durable. It just checks off pretty much every single box here. At my next receiver. So, uh, okay, so I'll give you my wide receiver. Three is Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then wide receiver four is Puka Nacua. That's how I have them ranked. I'm totally fine with JSN. I'm not avoiding JSN, right? I'm not fading him. But he's going there where I'm taking St. Brown, right? So like he generally doesn't get to me. Like it's not like my top six guys, top seven players are going, and then JSN is there. It normally doesn't happen. So I know haven't been getting a ton of JSN. I'm totally fine with JSN. I have him as my wide receiver three. All right. But where he's going and how I'm drafting this year and the players I'm very bullish on, I mentioned Jamar Chase. I mentioned St. Brown. If you heard the running back podcast, I'm all in on Omari and Hampton. Like for me, I have him inside my top five this season at the running back position. I think he's going to have a breakout campaign. We talked about the moves that they made there in Los Angeles, adding the fullback, beefing up the offensive line. They also get the tackles that are healthy. I know Slater is, dealing with some issues now, but it doesn't appear to be serious there. They brought in Mike McDaniel as the offensive coordinator. They brought in Charlie Kolar, obviously another a blocking tight end there. So they've definitely made all the right moves to, suggest that they're going to implement the run significantly in Los Angeles. So therefore, that's why I'm incredibly happy. Go replay, episode 133 and you hear all of that. But like just for perspective, so for me, so I'm taking someone like a Hampton over JSN just because I am, that high on, someone like Hampton. So it has nothing to do, right, with, JSN, and I think he's going to be a bust. No, I like JSN a lot. I was really bullish on him last year, who was someone I was aggressively targeting, and I'm totally fine with taking JSN. He's just not someone I'm aggressively targeting, right? Nakua, for me, there is concern there, right, as well as far as injuries is concerned. Um, Obviously, we know that he has an injury play, history. But again, I'm okay with taking him in the first round, like right, like he's not. I'm not going out of my way to fade someone like Nakua. But again, he's going in that range where I'm just going in different directions. If the draft goes Gibbs, Robinson, Chase, St. Brown, Amari Hampton, you know, then I'm looking at the JSNs of the world, the Nakuas of the world, but normally we don't see that happening, right? So, again, I'm not aggressively targeting them. I do have them ranked third and fourth, but again, they're not pe two players. I'm not going out of my way to draft here. Nico Collins is someone I like a lot, and I'm more aggressive on him than most. And I know the risk that comes with him, right? Like there is no denying that there comes with risk. If you look at his career, in year one, he played 14 games. Year two, 10 games. Year three, he played 15 games, 12 games in the following season, and 15 games last year. So he's missed multiple games in every season since entering the NFL. I have him ranked as wide receiver five. He's ADP is wide receiver nine. He's generally coming off, the board in the back end of round two, front end of round three. So this is why I'm a little bit comfortable, right? You can get Nico Collins in round three. So normally I have myself, one of those receivers and a running back, right? Or sometimes I'm going with two running backs. It really depends on the draft. Really depends on where I'm at. All that stuff matters. I say this all the time. If, you, you have to go with the plan, but you got to be willing to adjust. So I've been taking Nico Collins a lot, and in the second round of drafts and the front end of the third round. And he's someone I've been pretty bullish on since entering the NFL. And we were on him the year he broke out in 2023, and since then he really hasn't looked back, right? You look at what he's done. Over the last several years, he's been wide receiver 12 in PPR scoring, wide receiver 22, and then last year wide receiver 8. You look at the PPR points per game, 7, 9, and 10 at the position. So a top 10 receiver production wise over the last 3 years, each and every year. He's a dominant force. As look at the target share 22, 25, 25. We know that Jaden Higgins unfortunately suffered a torn ACL, so he's going to miss the remainder of the season. He was someone that I was really bullish on late in drafts, and unfortunately, we got to look for direction now. But I think that that's going to create more opportunities for Collins because I think Higgins was the one that was going to compete with him really for opportunities. You look at Tank Dell returning from injury, still dinged up. Jalen Noel also dinged up. He's going to be fine. But again, these are important and valuable opportunities that they're sitting out right now during practice. So I'm expecting big things for Nico Collins this year. It's just a matter of can he stay healthy, right? You look at his role in the red zone, and it was a big one, 23.5% target share inside the 20-yard line. Um, for Nico Collins, which is something I should have said about I'm on Ross St. Brown, by the way. All right. So I'm on Ross St. Brown. All right. In my case for him, I forgot to mention this in my notes here, but he led not only his team, but he led the NFL in red zone targets with 34. He accounted for 41.5% of the Lions' red zone target share. That's a significant amount. Okay. And the same thing with, when you look at Jamar Chase, he was top 7 in the NFL in red zone targets. So these are guys that are getting not only an abundance of opportunities, but valuable ones as well. Nico Collins also seeing a high target share in the red zone there. So for me, look, he's not coming off the first round. He's not someone I'm drafting in the first round, right? But he's someone I have inside my top 5 at the wide receiver position and someone I'm aggressively targeting. So for me, I'm very bullish on Nico Collins, and he's one of those receivers that's going in those early rounds, the top 3 rounds that I'm really, really bullish on. CeeDee Lamb is someone that's going in that first round, right? But I have him wide receiver 6, right? Behind Nico Collins. CeeDee Lamb is where I have his wide receiver 6 on my board. And I think a lot of people are concerned, regarding the down season for him. And I get it, man. It wasn't the kind of season we were expecting from CeeDee Lamb. He came in with career lows, or actually, I'm sorry, not career lows. So the 117 targets, second lowest of his career. The 75 receptions, second low of his career. 3 receiving touchdowns is the lowest of his career. Look, he played 14 games, so he missed some time. They added George Pickens. Pickens had a phenomenal season, obviously, taking away some opportunities there. But I'm not too concerned about CD. CD Lamb here. He still accounted for a 23% target share during his, when he was healthy. Someone that I expect is going to bounce back here, and I think he's going to carve out a solidified role. I think that we're going to see some positive regression in the touchdown department for him. Those 3 touchdowns, I think that's a fluke. I think we're going to see, his role continue to be consistent. And in addition to that, we're going to see more touchdown opportunities here for a team that, quite frankly, passes the ball a ton and is going to get a lot of red zone opportunities there. So Lamb is just I'm for me, I still think, when you look at the numbers, right? Like he showcased in 2023 wide receiver 1. He's been a top 10 receiver in 3 of the last 4 seasons. Despite a quote unquote down year last year, he was a wide receiver 13 in PPR points per game, averaging 14.3, fantasy points per game. If he gives you a top 12 season, which I think he can do at the position fairly easy, um, I think you're winning. Like I think you're going to be just fine here. So I'm taking him. I'm okay with taking him in that first round, the back end of the first round. Normally, I'm taking him in drafts where I'm missing, the, the Amon-Ra St. Browns and Jamar Chases of the world. If we can't, we'll talk about Justin Jefferson. We'll talk about AJ Brown, guys like that we like. But again, CD Lamb, totally fine with him here. I think the bounce back order is definitely a bounce back season is definitely in order here for CD Lamb. And when you just look at his role, it's consistent. Yes, maybe the ceiling is capped because of George Pickens, but I still think well over 100 targets. We saw it last year in just 14 games. And I think a much better season. Let's keep in mind he finished wide receiver 22nd, all right, in PPR scoring despite playing 14 games. All right. So just for perspective, I don't think it was as bad of a season as it, it may have felt for those who invested early in CD Lamb. Justin Jefferson, I just mentioned him. To me, I I love it. Like I have him at wide receiver 7, and I feel like that is too conservative. Like I truly feel like that's too conservative. But I continue to ask myself, who do I rank him ahead? And because I like all of these guys quite a bit ahead of him. But I think a bounce back season is certainly in order here for Justin Jefferson. Obviously coming off the down season. We know from a talent and skill perspective, one of the best receivers in football. He's one of those receivers you can make a strong case for as being better than Jamar Chase. Like I've heard the argument. It's a good argument. Obviously, it's a good case to be made. And when you look at the numbers, man, he's just been so consistent. Take last year away. Let's just remove last season because the quarterback play was absolute dog shit, right? Like I'm a JJ McCarthy guy. I was a JJ McCarthy guy. And I still have hope for the young man. I still think that, eventually he maybe get it going. Maybe wrong. I'm not sure, but you take away last year, right? He finished wide receiver 6, 4, 1, 31. He played 10 games that season, and 3 in PPR scoring. In PPR points per game, 9, 4, 2, 5, 4. Top 10 wide receiver in all but one season last year in PPR points per game, including 4 top 5 finishes and 3 top 4 finishes and 1 top 2 finish in that span, right? So I mean, he is an elite wide receiver. He produces at an elite level. He showed besides last year, right? He's shown that quarterback really hasn't been that big of an issue. Um, and I think there's certainly a bounce back season incoming here for Justin Jefferson. And this is you're getting him with a top 15 pick. And this is someone that, you know what, has been a top 5 pick several times in his career, right? So I don't want to say discount, but I do feel like you're getting a slight discount on Justin Jefferson here. His role is intact, ladies and gentlemen. When you look at the target share, 26, 29, 28, 27, 30, and 30, back-to-back years with 30% target share. That's not going anywhere here. The quarterback situation has improved from last year. They added Kyler Murray. I'm not a Murray guy myself, right? I think there's deficiencies in his game, but without question, okay, he's an upgrade from what they had last year in their situation last year at the quarterback. This is just the truth. You look at Justin Jefferson, well over 100 targets in every season. It has topped 1,000 receiving yards every single year, including his poor season last year. Someone who, low touchdown rate last year, 2 touchdowns total last year. I mean, that's what it is. Someone who had at least 7 receiving touchdowns in all but one season entering last year. So I think a bounce back order is definitely, or I'm sorry, a bounce back season is definitely in order here for Justin Jefferson, who's just an elite receiver, and the role is there. The opportunities are going to be there. The offense rolls around him, and I just think it's a better situation than the one he was last year. So I'm buying the slight discount here on Justin Jefferson. I have him wide receiver 7 on my board. He's ADP is wide receiver 6. So I'm in. I'm in on Justin Jefferson here. AJ Brown, wide receiver 8 on my board. Wide receiver 8 on ADP. So we're right there in lockstep. Generally coming off the board in round 2. Someone who I'm aggressively targeting in that round. New team there. Obviously, we know that he signed with New England. That was expected. We know that New England kind of like to spread the ball around there, but I do expect him to lean on him quite often. Last year, Stephon Diggs led the way for New England. He averaged 6 targets per game. He had a 21% target share. I expect that to be the absolute floor for AJ Brown. I anticipate a little bit more than 6 targets per game. I'm thinking more of that 7 to 8 range for him. There will be games where he obviously has lower, but I'm talking about a yearly average. I do see a path to that, right? And I do think that someone who didn't really, I don't think he had a down season. People talk about him having a down season. Like if 1,000 yards, 78 catches, and 7 receptions is a super down season, wide receiver 11 in PPR points, despite playing 15 games, wide receiver 11 PPR points per game. To me, that's now a down season. Look, I have him penciled in as a top 10 receiver for a reason. I think he could break out here in New England. We've seen some pretty big seasons out of him here. throughout his career. He's finished as a top five receiver in PPR scoring twice. He's been a top 12 PPR points per game wide receiver, top 12 wide receiver in all but one season since 2020. So since his second season in all but 1 year, he's been that. So he's clearly a productive player and he's clearly an elite receiver. It's just a matter of sometimes, there's just drama surrounding AJ Brown, and that's okay. We don't have to worry about that when it comes to fantasy purposes, right? He'll worry about production, opportunities, and efficiency, and I think he checks off most of these boxes. So, for me, I'm investing in him in round two. I think if you go with an aggressive approach and you want to go receiver, 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 him as your wide receiver too, man. Like that is music to my ears. So, look, he's been pretty durable. I guess I want to say he's played at least 13 games in every season since entering the NFL. He hasn't missed now. It is worth noting he did miss 4 games in 2024. He did miss 2 games after, so he has missed 6 games in the last 2 seasons. That being said, for the most part, he's been pretty durable. He'll play through injuries or whatnot. But AJ Brown, wide receiver 8 on my board, he's going to be a red zone threat for this New England team, right? The fact that they have a good run game and a good like supporting cast here and an elite quarterback, in my opinion, I think you're going to have some huge, and I mean huge games for AJ Brown this year. I love him in every single format. Someone that really checks off a lot of the boxes for me here. Um, Malik Neighbors, I have him wide receiver 10 on my board. He's coming off the board as wide receiver 13, usually between that back end of the second round, front end of the third round. A lot of times, what I've done is when I take a running back early on, and usually I do that, in the front end of drafts. If I miss on, if I miss on Chase or St. Brown, or if I go in a different direction, I like the idea of like starting running back, Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors. Like, I think that's a really strong start to drafts. You are taking the risk with Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins because Nico Collins has the injury history and he's missed multiple games in every season since entering the NFL. And then you have Malik Neighbors coming off of off a season-ending injury, the ACL injury there. So there is risk with that kind of approach early on, but I also think there's plenty of upside, right? So like I would probably limit my risk from then on, right? Like not take as much risk later with your build. But for me, I mean, like Malik Neighbors, we know what he's capable of doing, right? And we know that the role is going to be intact. 35% target share 2024 and 29% target share last year in the 4 games he played. I mean, he was obviously started off good before the injury. And you just look at the numbers. He was, year one, 18.2 PPR points per game. Last season was averaging 14.3 PPR points in the first 4 games. I think this young man, has top five potential. I think he has the ceiling to be the number one wide receiver in football fantasy from a fantasy standpoint, right? Like he has that potential, in my opinion. There's that certainly that in his game, and it's one I'm willing to bet on, right? You do take on risk when you take that approach, where you go with Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors with 2 of the first 3 rounds. Um, but again, you got 2 wide receivers that I feel can easily finish inside the top five if they stay healthy and things go as expected for these offenses and these players. So I'm in on Malik Neighbors. He was someone that I was back and forth, to be honest with you, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because of the risk. But all reports have been very steady with Malik Neighbors. They've been very steady, and I talk about this in the training camp report series that I do. And these are the reports I look for, right? The steady drumbeat. And that's what it's been with Malik Neighbors. He's been practicing, he's been on the field, there has been no setbacks, he's looking good, he's able to make cuts. There's no, there's just no issues right now, and there's no concerns or red flags as far as his, rehab is concerned. So definitely someone I'm actively targeting. You look at where he's going, front end of round three, another receiver that, when you look at last season was going in the first round. So he's a first round talent going in round three because he's returning from injury. So I'm willing to take that kind of chance with someone like Neighbors. Devonta Smith is wide receiver 11 on my board. He's usually coming off in round three. You're probably going to be getting him probably more in the middle or of that round three and not really in the front end. You could get him there, but that's probably where you're gonna land him. You look at the situation there in Philadelphia. No AJ Brown. We just talked about him. He was previously with the Eagles. He's leaving behind a 30% target share, 121 targets up for grabs now in Philadelphia. I don't necessarily think that's all going to go to Devontae Smith, but I do think he's going to benefit greatly from that, and he's going to see an uptick in his production and his opportunities there. The team also drafted Mekhi Lemon. We're going to talk about him a little later here, but again, you look at Devontae Smith, man, and he's been pretty consistent, right? Like quietly consistent. So wide receiver 9 in PPR, wide receiver 19, 28, and 20. Been a top 36 receivers, so top, he's a wide receiver 3 or better in each of the last 4 seasons. He's finished wide receiver 14, 21, 17, and 30 in PPR points per game, averaging over 14 fantasy points per game in 3 of his last 4 seasons. So I think his floor is going to be even more stable now that AJ Brown is, out the door. And you look at the numbers, man. He's had Devontae Smith over 100 targets in all but 1 season. And the only season he did not get 100 targets was the year he only played 13 games. That's another thing with Devontae Smith. I know he was dinged up. He's dealing with some issues now, soft tissue injury right now, back at practice. So that's good news. But believe it or not, he's played 16 or more games in all but 1 season and never played less than 13 games in a single season. So been pretty durable there. When you look at the target share, over a 20% target share in each and every season since entering the NFL, never below a 22% target share. I'm expecting in that 24 to 26% target share rate for Devontae Smith. I'm expecting a larger role in the red zone. Um, I'm buying, man. I'm pretty aggressive when you look at where I have him, right? I mentioned it. I have him wide receiver 11 on my board. He's wide receiver 14 on ADP on average. So like I'm a little bit more aggressive than the field there, but definitely someone I'm targeting in my drafts. Like I'm generally getting him as my wide receiver, 2, sometimes wide receiver 3, and he's a top 12 receiver on the board. So like this is the kind of build I'm super um intrigued by, right? Where I lock in one of those top running backs if I can, and then I start targeting these receivers, in the next several rounds. And if I miss on the running back early on, like obviously pivot, but again, if you could get Devontae Smith as your wide receiver 2 or receiver 3, I think you're, starting out your season pretty strong here in 2026. Garrett Wilson is another wide receiver I'm looking at. Having wide receiver 14 on my board. Um, his ADP is wide receiver 17. We're seeing him come off the board as early as the back end of round 3. Normally, we see him come off the board most on round 4. Look, Jets were a disaster last year. Let's just call it like it is. They were a disaster last year. In addition to that, Wilson was limited to just 10 games due to injury. I'm sorry, just 7, not 10. 7 games due to injuries. But someone that before last season was pretty consistent despite shitty quarterback play, right? Like that's the only way to describe it. There's no other way around it. And I'm not saying the quarterback play is going to be great. I'm not a Geno Smith guy. I don't, I've never been a Geno Smith guy. I don't think he's an elite quarterback by any means. But I think I think this offense, and I've been saying this all offseason, but I think it's going to be more stable, right? There's going to be more stability in this offense with Smith under center. And I think he's going to force feed the hell out of, Garrett Wilson here. We look at the numbers. Garrett Wilson, over 145 targets in his first 3 seasons with the Jets. Last year, 59 targets. Again, we go back to 7 games. Okay, that's last year. So I'm not really placing too much emphasis on that. 25%, 30%, 26%, 34%. That's the target share in his first 4 seasons in the NFL. He's finished wide receiver 21, 25, 9 in PPR scoring, wide receiver 31, 34, 19, and 15 in PPR per game. Last 2 seasons, yes, that last year, the shitty season he was averaging 14.2 PPR points per game. The year before, 15.1 PPR points per game. So that's a pretty good number, right? That's a pretty good number for someone who's coming off the board as wide receiver 17. You can easily get him as your wide receiver 3, man. If you lock in someone like Wilson as your wide receiver 3, I think that's a pretty strong receiving group there. So I'm pretty aggressive with him. He was obviously not going to double dip. I mentioned, last week's podcast, I like Breece Hall. Obviously, we know he's dealing with a multi-week injury, so it's something to keep an eye on. Wouldn't draft both players on the same team. I would try to avoid that given how bad this Jets team, is and I expect to be in 2026. It's still a work in progress, ladies and gentlemen. So keep that in mind. But I certainly think, you know, when you look at Garrett Wilson, he's going to bounce back this year. I think, so long as he stays healthy, I think he's, a top 20 receiver, man. I truly do. I think he's a top 15 receiver. I have him as a top 15 receiver on my board. So, um, I think you're going to get a good player, a consistent player, and someone who gives you what I expect to be a good weekly floor so long as he's healthy. So count me in for Garrett Wilson. I have him a little bit ahead of his ADP, but totally fine with him as your wide receiver two, even wide receiver three. I would love him as your wide receiver three. Zay Flowers, I have him as my wide receiver 16 on my board. His ADP is wide receiver 15, generally coming off the board, as early as the middle of round three. And we see him coming off the board in round four a lot, right? So he locked in a big payday, $140 million contract with a $108 million guarantee. These are the three words that I have written down: durable, reliable, consistent. His role is solidified. You look at it, right? 24, 25, 29% target share. He's had over 100 targets in each of his first three seasons in the NFL, over 70 receptions every season. Last 2 years, he's topped 1,000 receiving yards. He's finished 28th, 24th, and 7th in PPR scoring at the wide receiver position. When you look at PPR points per game, wide receiver 29, wide receiver 35, wide receiver 11. Coming off a big season, his best season, yet he pretty much hit career highs in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and pretty much everything. Fantasy points. The only thing he didn't hit career highs was in touchdown, where he had 5 receiving touchdowns. He had six in 2023 as a rookie. So this is another player that gives you that weekly floor, that consistent production. He's a great pairing with those volatile receivers. And for me, man, I'm in on Zay Flowers. I've been taking him again as a wide receiver two. Often he's my wide receiver three, and in those builds, I really feel strong about my receiving group. So, someone who I think is targeting in drafts this season. You obviously catch a pass from one of the best quarterbacks in football. There's no need to expect his role to change. They have Bateman. They're talking about utilizing Bateman in several other ways. We know Jacoby Lane has received some praise, but I don't expect that his Zay Flowers role is going to change. They don't have Isaiah Likely anymore here. So look, I think Zay Flowers is going to continue to produce pretty consistent numbers there on a week-to-week basis for the Baltimore Ravens. And it gives you just, again, you have stability, right? Your foundation is strong. Your foundation is stable. These are the kind of receivers I'm gravitating towards here right now. Yes, you can go with, Drake London. I like Drake London a lot. Like we did talk about Drake London. He's someone that I have inside my top 12 that I haven't talked about. And he's one that I'm not targeting at ADP. I'm not. I have concerns about the durability at the quarterback position. They have two injury-prone quarterbacks in Atlanta. Michael Penix is not healthy yet. Tagovailoa has dealt with issues and soreness and injuries already in camp, right? I am a big Drake London fan. In fact, I have him in several dynasty leagues. I believe in the talent. I believe in the player. I'm just terrified about the quarterback situation. Chris Olave is another receiver I have inside my top 12 that I like quite a bit this season, but I'm not taking him with my style. I'm not taking him a lot. I'm not taking him often. He's not one of quote unquote my guys. I'm not going to talk you out of drafting him because I like him and I have him ranked inside my top 12, but I'm not going out of my way to draft him, right? So I do want to distinguish the difference. And the same thing can be said about, George Pickens. I'm buying CeeDee Lamb instead of George Pickens in those early things. I am getting, George Pickens in Dallas Cowboy stacks and best ball formats. And I have drafted George Pickens, but he's not someone I'm aggressively targeting, right? So like the guys I'm going to focus on today are my guys, like the guys I'm aggressively targeting. So there's a receiver that I don't mention today. It's not that I'm going out of my way. You'll hear me say I'm going out of my way to fade this guy, right? There are several of those guys. But these are just guys that I'm not aggressively targeting early on in drafts. Very next guy here on my board. So obviously we talked about, Zay Flowers. One of my favorite targets at his ADP is Terry McLaurin. I talked about this with Justin Fensterman last week on the Fantasy Sports Daily Show. You catch that on replay over there at fantasyguru.com. And to me, I have him as wide receiver 17 on my board. His ADP is wide receiver 23. He's generally coming off the board back end of round four. More so than not, he's coming off the board in that, round five range. He was limited to just 10 games last season, right? But his first year with Jaden Daniels, wide receiver seven. In that season, he had 117 targets, 82 catches, 1,096 receptions, and a career high 13 receiving touchdowns. He had a 23% target share that season. He finished wide receiver 16 in PPR points per game, wide receiver seven overall on the season. I don't anticipate 13 touchdowns again, right? But I do anticipate a player who has that top 20 potential, top 15 potential that we've seen from him. And I'm not concerned about the team adding Stephon Diggs. That's not worrisome for me. In fact, that's maybe more so helpful, someone else to alleviate that pressure, from the defense from Terry McLaurin. So for me, I don't think anything's going to change. I think his role's intact. The chemistry between him and Jaden Daniels is there. I think so long as both of them stay healthy, I think this a bounce back season is it's going to happen for Terry McLaurin. That's what I'm banking on here. He's someone that probably one of my higher owned receiver. He and another one that I haven't discussed yet, the best ball. But normally when I take that aggressive approach at the running back position early on, like if I am able to double click Genty and Hampton, Jonathan Taylor and Hampton, Hampton and Chase Brown. Like those are kind of combinations I've, keyed in on in some of my drafts. When I'm able to do this, something like that, Terry McLaurin is probably going to end up as my wide receiver three more often than not, right? So I'm just buying the talent, I'm buying the role. And I'm not concerned whatsoever about the addition of Stephon Diggs. I'm still expecting a healthy amount of targets for Terry McLaurin. It's just the chemistry with him and Jaden Daniels is pretty clear. We saw it that first season, and I don't see that going anywhere here. I think that's going to continue to grow. So another favorite target of mine here at his ADP. And you just look at the numbers, right? Like so with Jaden Daniels in games. All right. So I have the numbers here. So there's 20 games that Terry McLaurin has played with Jaden Daniels, 7 games without that they've both played here. So he's averaged over a fantasy point more per game. All right. It doesn't seem significant, but it's one more fantasy point per game over that. Nearly one more reception per game. Okay. Six more receiving yards, one more target. So it's just again like the slight numbers changes and increases, but if they compound over the course of the season, they're meaningful, right? So for me, man, Terry McLaurin, I think a bounce back order is in season this year. Let's go. Let's go. Terry McLaurin. I got him again, ladies and gentlemen. I have a wide receiver 17. He's going wide receiver 23. Romo Dunze is my next guy that I want to talk about. He's another guy I'm targeting. He's wide receiver 20 on my board. His ADP is wide receiver 28. I've seen him go as early as the back end of round five. I've also seen him go around six and seven. Six more often than not. Seen him go as far as seven in some drafts. He had a weird second season, right? He's a third year, so he's entering his third year in 2026. I'm old school, right? I used to write the third year article, like the third year wide receiver article. It was a thing where, this was many years ago. Obviously, you're going to see how old I am once I finish saying this. But this was several years ago where I would write the article, receivers entering their third year, and how that's the year that they generally take that step forward. Clearly, the game has changed, and we see receivers hit the ground running, right off the bat in year one. So, but this is a player that's entering year three with a young quarterback that's, also getting another year in the NFL, another year of experience in the NFL. So I'm expecting high things and big things for Rome Odunze this year. He's wide receiver 20 on my board, like I mentioned, wide receiver 28. You look at the target share last year, 24. He had 90 targets despite, so as a rookie, he had 100 targets in 2024. Last year, he had 90. He played 12 games last year. He played all 17 games as a rookie. The target share 24, 5% increase from this previous year. You look at the, PPR points per game, he was wide receiver 27, averaging 12.2 PPR points per game. So like his numbers improved from year one to year two. The problem is he was limited to 12 games. All right. So like once week 10 came out, that's it, or I'm sorry, it was in week 13, right? So like that's when he suffered the season-ending injury there. He was wide receiver three in PPR points per game and in PPR, just PPR for the first 4 weeks of the season. Okay. So in the first 4 weeks of the season last year, Odunze was wide receiver three in PPR scoring and PPR points per game. Um, I think the role is going to be consistent. A lot of people are on Luther Burden. I'm out. Like, there you go. I'm out. That's one of those guys I'm out on. Luther Burden. And I know that the ADP is, taking a hit now because of the injury. But even before the injury, I was out on Luther Burden. If he gets cheap enough where I'm comfortable taking him short, but the hype was significant. I know that he was going pretty aggressively in drafts. And I'll pull up his ADP now as I continue to talk about Odunze. But for me, Odunze is the number one wide receiver on this team, right? I think he's going to outperform his ADP. I've taken him as my wide receiver three very often. At times, he is my wide receiver four. And he's someone I plan on flexing. But for me, I'm all in the sense of when I'm looking at this receiving group, the one guy that I'm comfortable drafting is Odunze. I obviously like Loveland. I do think he's expensive. We'll talk about him when we talk tight ends. And then Luther Burton, I'm just not drafting him at this time. He's coming off the board as wide receiver 22. Um, and to me, that's just too expensive right now for someone like Luther Burton. Can he hit value? Sure, a healthy Burton can hit value. Am I willing to take that kind of chance? No. Another receiver I'm out on, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 21. He's coming off the board. Just I'm out. Like I'm simply out on Jalen Waddle. He was here in Miami, very productive. I don't think he's going to beat out Cortland Sutton, and we're going to talk about Cortland Sutton very shortly. I don't think he's going to be the number one wide receiver in Denver. And when you're getting someone like Cortland Sutton so much cheaper, I can't, I cannot click that draft button. Simply cannot. I may have Jalen Waddle in best ball, maybe what if I have him in one best ball league, sure, I'm stacking maybe. Like my plan was to stack. But in redraft right now, I have zero shares of him, and I'm just not investing in someone like Jalen Waddle this year, given the price. Like just wide receiver 22, a little bit too pricey for me there. When we look at so that was a doomsday. DJ Moore, I have him wide receiver 22. His ADP is wide receiver 24. He's one of those that I'm targeting, but I'm not like extremely bullish on. Like I'm right there, with the field. As far as Moore is concerned, we know that the Buffalo Bills have been searching for their alpha receivers, searching for their guy since Stephon Diggs left. Amari Cooper didn't work out. Keon Coleman, that experiment unfortunately hasn't worked out. This is coming for someone who was pretty excited about Keon Coleman entering the NFL. Well, I've been completely wrong on him there. So DJ Moore, man, he's flashy. He's capable of producing big numbers. I think he's capable of being a reliable weapon for someone like Josh Allen. So I'm hopeful that it pans out in Buffalo, but we've seen this experiment. It just hasn't, right? So far the reports have been steady. The reports have suggested that the chemistry's building. Josh Allen has spoken positively of Moore. These are all good things, but until we see it on the football field with pads on in the regular season, we just have to take the wait and see approach. Am I going to take that chance with someone like DJ Moore? Hell yeah. Why? Because he's catching passes from one of the best quarterbacks in football, right? Like this is one of the most explosive offenses in football. I want to be invested in that. And I don't think you're paying a premium price, right? For me, wide receiver, when you look at it, he's coming off the board at wide receiver 24, usually round four. That's early as I've seen him is the back end of round four. And those are aggressive leagues. More often than not, he's coming off the board in round five, sometimes round six, right? So round five, six is where you're probably going to get him. I think that's a good price for a receiver that has a pretty significant ceiling considering his circumstances, right? Because without question, if he's healthy, right, and he's able to learn this playbook and he's able to build that chemistry with Josh Allen, without question, he's the best receiver on this roster right now, right? So I think he's going to have an opportunity to be that number one guy that they've been searching for. They've been searching for. So he's another one of those mid-tier receivers like that I'm getting in that fifth, sixth round. Like again, these are receivers I'm targeting these rounds, and I'm giving you several options here because you're going to see like I the way I've been drafting is these are the rounds. Like I'm normally going round, the first three rounds, first four rounds, I'm generally coming off the board with at least one running back, sometimes two. But then after that, I'm spending a lot of my next rounds addressing the wide receiver position because I think that there's significant drop off at one point, right? And I wanted to get as many receivers as I possibly can before that drop off. And I'll let you know where that drop off is when we get there. But another wide receiver who's coming off the board in round six, round seven on average, he's ADP is wide receiver 32. I have him as wide receiver 25, so a little bit more aggressive than the field. Is someone who's entering year three as well. Someone who has not lived up to expectations. But again, I don't think that, he's someone that I'm worried about, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., you look at the numbers, like he's had a 22% target share, 18% target share last year. He missed time, played 12 games. Wide receiver 42 in PPR scoring year one, wide receiver 40 in PPR, this per game, by the way, in year two. Look, I'm not drafting, right, Marvin Harrison Jr. as a wide receiver two. I'm not drafting him as my wide receiver one. He's my wide receiver more often than not. He's my wide receiver four slash flex. Like that's where I'm at with him. He's inside my top 25, but the way I draft, like these are the kind of guys I want. I think that this is a season where he gets it going, right? There was issues early on in the career with Kyler Murray, whether or not they were on the same page, where they trusted each other. Then last year there was, obviously Jacoby Brissett was under center for some time. He missed some time. Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think an off season here, right, with Brissett getting the time, I think we're finally going to see the kind of production we've all been hoping for from Mario Harrison Jr., right? Like that, top 24 receiver in PPR scoring. Like, I do think that's very feasible here. I don't have him ranked as such, but I think it's a feasible path, right? There is a feasible path to that there. I know that Arizona passed a ton last year, right? I don't necessarily know, don't expect them to pass as much, but I still think this is an offense that's going to have to throw the football. So I expect Marvin Harrison Jr. Um, to finally get it going, right? I do think he's finally going to get it going. This team, obviously, they haven't given up on him. There's been a lot of reports suggesting that they're expecting big things from him this year. So I am too, and I'm drafting him as such here in my fantasy draft. Another player I'm targeting here, entering his third season. I mentioned Cortland Sutton. So for me, look, the wide receiver I have most exposure to right now in best ball is Cortland Sutton. To me, he's just coming off the board way too cheap. He's coming off the board around seven on average, right? Wide receiver 35. I have him wide receiver 28 on my board. Let's just look at the numbers since Nick's arrived. All right. 2024. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 11. Average 14.3 fantasy points per game in PPR scoring, wide receiver 24 in PPR scoring per game. 2025, wide receiver 13, 12.9 PPR points per game, wide receiver 21 in PPR points per game. So you've been the top 14 receiver, top 13 receiver in PPR scoring the first 2 years with Bo Nix. All right, let's look at the numbers. 136 targets, 81 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 25% target share. Year two with Knicks, 123 targets, 74 receptions, 1,017 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, 21% target share. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not going anywhere. Jalen Waddle's arrival is not scaring me. Cortland Sutton, in my opinion, upwards of 120 targets, upwards of a 20% target share. And I think another top 30 season is in order for him. You're getting him around 7. You're often getting him as your wide receiver 4 or worse if you draft like the style I draft. So you could have 2 running backs, a quarterback, and Cortland Sutton could be your 4th receiver. Or you can have 2 running backs and you go nuts on receiver, right? Like early on in the draft, and guess what? You have 5 receivers and 2 running backs. And you still have a shitload of quarterbacks and tight ends to target in these rounds. All right. So there's so many different ways that you could approach these drafts. And like this is for me, like my probably one of my favorite overall targets ADP. Overall at all positions, but almost without question, my favorite target ADP at the wide receiver position here. Just too cheap, man. You just look at the production here, and he is going to be uh I mean, I think he has a good chance to outperform his ADP by a wide margin here. Again, someone I'm stacking a lot of my chips against here. So I have him here on my board as a very strong target at ADP. Jacoby Myers coming off the board, wide receiver 30. I'm sorry, wide receiver 48, rounds 9 plus, but I have him wide receiver 31. So um, let's look at this is one of those situations where you gotta get this right, right? There's Brian Thomas Jr., there's Parker Washington. There's been a lot of buzz regarding both of them and how they're going to be utilized. There's also been good reports regarding Jacoby Myers. Um, when you look at last year, right, he was traded to the Jaguars, and from week 10 on, when he played with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he led the team in targets. He led all wide receivers in snap percentage. He was wide receiver 16 in PPR scoring, wide receiver 27 in PPR points per game. He had a 23% target share, 61 targets. The second closest came behind him was Parker Washington, who had 51 targets. Granted, Brian Thomas missed some time during that span. Washington also missed a game during that span. They were dealing with injuries. Obviously we had Strange miss some time during that span. So there was injuries, right? But the reports have suggested that Myers and Trevor Lawrence continue to build that chemistry from carrying over from last year. When you look at where he's going, I'm okay with taking the chance on Jacoby Myers. I truly, truly am, because you're getting yourself a player who I think could give you a pretty good floor. I think there's nice upside here to be had. I think he's going to carve out a solidified role. I'm expecting over a 20% target share once again. I think that he's going to operate here as a security blanket and a go-to source for Trevor Lawrence. So for me, man, I'm in on Jacoby Myers. You look at the Jaguars receivers and you look at their ADPs, and he's coming off the board as the cheapest one, right? Like you have Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 33. You have Jacoby, well, like I already mentioned Jacoby Myers. You have Jacoby Myers, wide receiver 48, and you have Parker Washington, wide receiver 31. I'm going to take the discount on Myers, man. I think that production could be there. Is he an elite receiver? No, but this is round nines plus now, right? Like we're looking at roles, we're looking at players who, cannot perform their ADP by a significant margin. I think he has a good shot at doing so. I'm higher on him than most, I think. But for me, Jacoby Myers is one of those guys I'm targeting at this stage of the draft. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, ladies and gentlemen, like he's someone that is boring. He's not exciting. He's right? But if you're looking for a pretty decent floor, I think you're going to get that from Wan'Dale Robinson on the new team now with Tennessee. Obviously, his role last year in New York was significant. He had a 30% target share, 25% target share the year before, back-to-back seasons with 90 plus receptions, back-to-back seasons with at least 140 targets. I don't anticipate that kind of volume, but I do expect well over 100 targets, right? I don't know if he's going to get 90 plus receptions, but I do expect 70 plus, 60 plus. I think there's a good floor here for someone like Wan'Dale Robinson. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up leading this offense in targets and opportunities. As far as targets is concerned, not rushing, obviously. And the receiving groups, I mean, in opportunities. So I do like him. I think he's coming off the board in a reasonable range. So he's coming off the board wide receiver 43 on average, around nines plus. And man, I just, I'm sorry, round eight plus. Sometimes he does come out or he is drafted in round nine. But we've seen him come off the board rounds 8 plus, wide receiver between 43, 46 range, depending on where you're drafting. So look, he does get a slight downgrade at the quarterback position with Cam Ward, I think, but we know that Ward is going to pepper him here with targets, So I'm in on Wan'Dale Robinson. He's been a reliable source, reliable underneath source. For quarterbacks, I expect him to be that for the young rookie or I'm sorry, the second year quarterback there. So count me in on Wan'Dale Robinson here in 2026. Makai Lemon, wide receiver 38 on my board, wide receiver 43, rounds 9 plus on average. He's starting to drop recently in drafts because of the hamstring injury. The good news is that he's been back at practice, so that's a positive sign. You never want these rookies to miss practice. Those are valuable reps that he's missing out on. A big guy, a big fan of Makai Lemon. I thought he was one of the better receivers in this draft class. Uh, Obviously the landing spot is a good one because there's going to be opportunities. I mentioned before, 30% target share that AJ Brown is leaving behind, 121 targets. I think Lemon is going to step into that number two role so long as he can stay healthy. I think that's going to be a valuable role here for him. And I'm taking shots on the rookie. I'm not drafting him with the anticipation of starting him. He's wide receiver 38 on my board, so like that's a flex play in a 12-team league. Uh, but if you've kind of gathered the information that I've been taught, saying throughout the podcast, you know that I'm more than likely probably six receivers deep at this point, right? On my roster. So again, I'm not drafting him to start him in week one, but he's someone that I think at some point can, carve out the consistent role that you're looking for from a receiver that you want to start in your fantasy lineup. So count me in for Makai Lemon. I like the ADP where he's going. I like the talent. I believe the talent. I think he has. I mean, he's a polished route runner in my opinion. I think he has great hands. And I think he checks off a lot of the boxes. So I'm pretty big on him. I drew comps to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and again, I'm not saying he's that, but I like this young man quite a bit. And I think that if he can stay healthy and if he could get back and stay on that practice field between now and the start of the season, I think he can make an immediate impact for the Philadelphia Eagles here. Other guys I'll probably have some shares of later in drafts. Michael Pittman, Romeo Dobbs. Quentin Johnston, but preferably in best ball. I do think the up and down there is going to be very annoying. I don't think there's going to be consistent production out of Quentin Johnston. But again, someone that I do think when you look at the end of the season, there's going to be some pretty significant weeks, right? Some big games with some big touchdowns and whatnot. And then Darnell Mooney is another one in the best ball I'm kind of gravitating towards. Do I think he's going to be consistent? Far from that. But when you look at this supporting cast here, right, like they have Likely, they have Theo Johnson, they have obviously Malik Neighbors, you have the run game. Yep, much else. This is more of best ball just because I do think that they'll probably be what 2 to 4 weeks where there's a chance Mooney goes off. Like I'll take that at best ball where he's going. He's going off drafts really late, so I don't mind taking those chances. Those are some other guys. Michael Pittman, like I mentioned. Now I'm very intrigued by him. Like he's one of those receivers that I've always liked. Ever since he came out of college, I've been a big fan of Michael Pittman. And I hate the landing spot. I don't see the Steelers a team that's going to pass a lot, and they have DK Metcalf. Um, so that's my concern. But I do like Michael Pittman, and I do like the talent. When you're building, okay, so let's talk a little bit about building, and then I'll give you we'll close it out with some of my late round targets. But when you're building, and it occurred to me now because I said DK Metcalf, right? So when you're building your wide receiving group, I like the idea of getting several of the high end guys. Ideally, I could get two of those high end guys, right? Like two of the top 12 on my board. Ideally, right? If I could leave every draft with that and then draft from then on, because at that point now, like my wide receiver 3 is probably gonna be a wide receiver 2 on my board, and so on and so forth with the drop off. But then the kind of receivers I get, right? Like I talked about Jamar Chase early on. I talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown, and there's no volatility when it comes to these guys. But then I talked about the volatility we have with Nico Collins, not from a production standpoint, but from the durability standpoint, right? There's guys like DK Metcalf, right? Like Tyler Lockett's of the past, like the Deshaun Jacksons of the past, right? Like these guys that were boomer bust. Like there are those kind of receivers. I mentioned Quentin Johnston, like boomer bust kind of receivers, not consistent. There's going to be one week where he gives you 15 plus fantasy points. One week he gives you 2, 3 fantasy points. I try to not take on too many of those on my roster. Because yes, the ceiling is significant and we love ceilings. Ceilings are so fun. But if you're playing a game where you got to win just this week, forget about when that ceiling goes off, right? why are you taking on that much risk, right? Like, why are you taking on? I love the swing for the ceiling, but I also want some type of floor. I don't want a zero floor high, insane ceiling guy. Give me somewhat of a floor. So I try to limit as many as the kind of receivers like DK Metcalf, where they're like just boom or bust on my roster as possible. And that's probably why you didn't hear me talk about some of the guys that I didn't talk about today. And it's maybe because of that. And then maybe I did talk about some of these guys not because of anything, but because I'm not overly excited. So the way I like to do it is I like to build for floors. And then once I get, a strong foundation, I'm going to start taking shots on those boomer bust guys. And I'll be selective of when I'm starting them. I'll look at games. I'll look at, obviously my situation too. Am I dealing with injuries, bye weeks, all that stuff. But these are guys you probably don't want to count on a week-to-week basis. And more often than not, when you have these kind of players on your roster, unless you're starting them each and every week, guess what? You're probably not going to guess the week that they go off because it's just unpredictable, right? So keep that in mind when it comes to these kind of players and these kind of wideouts. I like I'm not saying that you want 10 Wando Robinsons that are just like a 10 to 12 PPR points per game. No, I'm not saying that. Give me my 15 plus PPR points per game from a wide receiver, but one that gives me also a solidified floor on a week-to-week basis, or at least a relatively solid weekly floor there. All right, let's dive into some of the late round flyers I'm targeting here before we bounce out of here. So we'll start off with Trey Harris. His ADP is wide receiver 65. All right. Overall, he's going 140 plus, like overall in draft. So you're talking about in a 10-team league, 14 rounds. In a 12-team league, what, 10, 11 rounds, around 10 plus. Look, we don't know. Like, we know McConkey's the guy there. We have Quentin Johnston there. Several moving pieces, but I've continued to read so many good things about Trey Harris, right? Young receiver there. Team invested in him. And I think, he could get going. McConkey has struggled with battled injuries. Keenan Allen is no longer with in the picture here. He actually signed with the Colts. So I think Trey Harris can carve out a solidified role. I really like this Chargers offense in 2025. And I look at Harris and I think he could be a contributor here. And you're not investing much, you're not taking on much risk. So the risk reward factor here is significant for me. And therefore, I've been investing in him. He's probably one of my highest owned late round guys. Like he's probably the high, not probably, he is the highest owned late round receiver I've been targeting right now in best ball. So he's someone I'm very excited about. Chris Bell, he was activated from the active non-football injury list. He's coming off the board, wide receiver 93 overall. Overall 220 plus. Like, when you're looking at overall picks, he's coming off the board 220 plus. So he's not being drafted in shallow bench leagues, obviously, but in deeper leagues, he is being drafted. We know Miami right now, when you look at this receiving group, it's not good, right? Bell coming off the injury, he was someone that could have been he's first round talent, caliber talent, first, second round talent, went in the third round to Miami because of the injury. I think this young man is going to be impactful. Obviously, whether or not he's ready in week one, that remains to be seen. But man, I love the idea of taking a late round flyer on that ceiling. This is the kind of risk you want, right? Like, this is the risk. Now, where you're not sacrificing an early draft capital. No, you're sacrificing a late round pick. Now let's swing for that ceiling. Now let's swing for that fucking roof. Like, let's just swing for that fucking fence. Let's just do it, right? Like, this is the way to do it. So Chris Bell, one I'm pretty bullish on. I think he has a very easy path to being the number one wide receiver in Miami when healthy. Stay in Miami, Caleb Douglas has looked really good in camp. In the preseason, he made that one spectacular catch. He made that other catch that was ruled out of bounds, but was still a fucking great catch. Like, he caught the ball, just landed out of bounds. He's coming off the board, ADP, wide receiver, 84th on average, with an overall ADP of 170 plus. Deshaun Stribling has looked good. They're getting him involved. I know they have several guys there in San Francisco, but a lot of these guys are older and some of them have battled injuries and some are coming off injuries. So, I think Stribling is an interesting target, wide receiver 59 on average. I think you can make a case for him as a, add and stash. Again, these are guys that you're not depending on, right, in week one, right? Let's keep that in mind. These are guys you're drafting and you're kind of being patient with, right? Kind of to see what happens, see what transpires with their roles. let's see what happens in the first month of the season with these guys. I don't like to cut these late round flyers often if they don't carve out a role early on because some of these situations are just uncertain and unstable, especially early on in the season. Do you think we're going to get clarity in week one in Miami? Hell no. Do you think that we're going to get complete clarity, in week one in Los Angeles? Probably not. It could be Quentin Johnson that goes bananas and then he just duds the next 3 weeks, right? Like we've seen that before. So again, something to keep in mind when you're drafting these guys. Don't expect production early on. Jaden Higgins would have been here. Obviously, he's out with a season-ending injury, ACL tear there, unfortunately. Jalen Noel is someone I'm looking at now. He's coming off the board, wide receiver 97 on average. Overall 220 plus. Deeper league guy for me. I've been taking him in best ball now because I have had invested in Jaden Higgins. So I kind of just like, security blanket there for me. And again, just a deeper league, target of mine, not someone that, in a 10-team shallow bench league, you have to go and draft. I do expect his price to continue to increase. It has been increasing over the last, 24 hours since this news came out. And then the other one is Ted Hurst. Again, wide receiver 91, that's his ADP overall, 200 plus. Deeper league addition as well for me. Someone that on the team, like, with like Buka has dinged up, he's battled injuries in camp. We know obviously Godwin injury played season, like McMillan dinged up, like a dinged up receiving group, like and so far our reports have been pretty steady and pretty strong when it comes to Hurts. So those are some late round flyers that I'm targeting. And that wraps up the podcast, really. We talked about the wide receiver position at length. We discussed my top tier guys, kind of, once you get that outside my top 12, there's a pretty strong bucket of, of group of wide receivers I'm targeting. I love the idea, ladies and gentlemen, of snagging, 4 to 5 receivers in those first 7, 8 rounds. Like I really do like the idea of that because there is a drop off. Once you drop off that, from the Wandale Robinson, I think you can make cases for a lot of guys. There's Michael Wilson, there's players in that range. You can make a case for Alec Pierce, but he's dinged up. You can make a case for Christian Watson, DK Metcalf, but we talked about DK Metcalf as the volatility of his game. Chris Godwin returning from injury. Just Cardinal Tate, rookie bad quarterback situation. Like Michael Pittman, but again, do they pass? So like these are guys that you can make a case for, right? But again, there's concerns with a lot of these guys, right? You don't want to rely on some of these guys in week one or maybe beyond that, right? So I like the idea of targeting, try to target at least 4 or 5 of the receivers that you have inside your top 40 that you're comfortable with, right? That you feel give you a good combination of somewhat of a stable floor as well as, baked in upside where they can outperform that ADP, right? So like that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for opportunities here. I want target shares. I want volume. And don't get stuck on target share alone. Like look at how many targets he's actually getting, right? There are low pass volume teams that if a wide receiver has 20% target share, that might equate to 5, 6 targets a game where a player in a high passing volume, with a 20% target share might equate to 8, 9 targets a game. So like you be mindful of the offense you're investing in. The Bengals are a high passing offense. The Cowboys are a high passing offense. Like these are the kind of offenses you want to be looking for. That's why T. Higgins, George Pickens are pretty expensive, right? And I'm investing in both of them, but I'm not going on my way to target. I have exposure to both of them, but again, I'm not going on my way to target these guys. So just be mindful of that, right? When you're investing in wide receivers, you want position, you want opportunities, but you also want high-powered offenses as well with some of these guys, especially when you're torn for that second wide receiver on the team. We talked all things wide receivers. We talked high-end guys. We talked middle-tier guys. We talked late-round targets. We talked fades here on the Mind the Marsal podcast. So hopefully you enjoyed this week's journey through the Mind the Marsal podcast, and catch you guys next time.